Okay, thank you so much, Liz. So now we're going to kind of switch over and start talking about our own personal responses to being in toxic or abusive relationships. I think sometimes the quote unquote victims, we like to think of them as survivors, but that person who's experiencing the abuse or the effects of a toxic relationship often get a bad rep. Mostly we hear questions like, well, why don't they just leave that person? How could you stay? How could you not see these things? How did they not see the signs? And I think we ask ourselves those questions too. So I think first and foremost, it's important to remember it is not your fault, okay? So like Liz was kind of saying with that really cool pyramid graphic, every relationship is unique. It's not all good or all bad. So if you think about it, oftentimes you enter into a relationship with somebody because of the positive qualities, because you are attracted to a person, or you see qualities in a friendship that are something that you look for in a relationship. And we also can't pick our families. So sometimes the family relationship is something that we don't necessarily have control over. In regards to the question of why don't you just leave him, her, or them, I think it's really important to take into consideration the type of abuse. So like Liz said, it's oftentimes not just one form of abuse, and it does kind of have a scale between the healthy relationship qualities, the unhealthy and toxic, and then the abusive, and it's not always 100% of the time going to be all good or all bad. We need to take into account that this person may feel like they're dependent on their partner or their family member or an individual, especially when it comes to the financial and property ownership abuse that we were talking about before. They might feel like if they are not involved with this person, or they try to get themselves out of a situation, they may no longer have emotional support, financial support, a roof over their heads. So unhealthy and abusive relationships may also impact a person's psyche. So if you think about emotional and psychological abuse, there's a lot of manipulation. There is distrust. There is kind of a break from your own reality where you start to question what is real, what is not real. Maybe this person is right. And I think it's also important to take into account the attachment style or previous experience of how care or love is expressed. So oftentimes, if you take a look at attachment style between caregiver and child, if you have only ever experienced unhealthy or abusive traits in relationships, it's not uncommon for that person to also continue engaging in relationships in which the same toxic, unhealthy, or abusive patterns are present because it is all that person has experienced in the past. I think lastly, it's important to consider cultural aspects of different relationships. So not every culture views men and women the same way. And that's something that we just have to be empathetic about. And finally, perpetrators use any and all tactics to maintain control. I think this is common knowledge, but gaslighting is one of the main things that we see in unhealthy or abusive relationships. And gaslighting is a tactic that perpetrators use to get an individual to question their own reality or believe something that might not necessarily be true. We also have seen on that pyramid graphic that isolation is often used in unhealthy and abusive relationships. So that's a tactic used to make a person entirely dependent on that individual or isolate them from their support system, so they feel as if the perpetrator is the only person that they truly have in their lives. And then finally, there's the fear tactics and violence that might be used to scare a person. And so sometimes, based on the situation, it might feel safer to remain in a situation where there is abuse or violence used from time to time versus taking the risk of leaving that relationship, and they might experience more intense violence or fear for their life in some instances. So on that note, we're going to talk about a few ways to check in with yourself and kind of ground yourself in reality. So I titled this slide, Am I Just Overreacting? Probably not. I think, especially in unhealthy relationships, we hear a lot of times where individuals will say, well, maybe I'm just being crazy, or maybe I'm overreacting, or, maybe I just not need to be so sensitive. But I think that it's so important to trust your gut first and foremost. Our intuitions are there to help guide us and to help us keep us safe. So if something feels off or unsettling, just take a few minutes to check in with yourself. Ask yourself, why does it feel off? Why does it feel unsettling? Because oftentimes there is something off or something that you are trying to pay attention to. It's important to try to maintain healthy boundaries as best as you can. Relationships are about compromise, but it should never feel like a sacrifice. So if you feel that you have set these boundaries and they might be crossed, you need to have an awareness about that and make sure that you stand your ground. In layman's terms, you might hear that as like a deal breaker, right? And it's okay to have deal breakers in relationships and things that you're comfortable with and things that you're uncomfortable with, and communicate that to your partner or your family member or to your friends. And then I think it's also important to honor your feelings or reactions. I think we hear a lot of like, I just need to be stronger, or I just need to have tougher skin, or I just need to not let things get to me so easily. But if you feel that way, then it's valid. No one can tell you how to feel or not feel. It's also important to check in and be honest with yourself, which can be really hard, right? But the only person who knows you better than anyone else is yourself. So check in with yourself and ask yourself, how do you feel before, during, and after spending time with this person? Do you feel happy, at peace? Do you feel love, joy? Or do you feel anxious before you're about to interact with this person? Do you find yourself feeling emotionally or physically drained afterwards? Are you agitated? And then you really want to check in with yourself about how your safety is. Do you feel safe? Do you feel safe emotionally, physically, sexually? Is this individual pressuring you to do things that you don't feel comfortable with? You also want to take into account if you notice a shift, either negative or positive, in your self-esteem or your self-worth. So you should never seek external validation for your own self-worth or how you feel about yourself. However, that's easier said than done. So if you find that you are feeling excessively negative about yourself, or feel as if you have to change different things about yourself constantly, or you are less than because of your interactions with these people or how they're making you feel, then that might be a warning sign that it's becoming an unhealthy, toxic, or abusive situation that you might need to get yourself out of. And finally, ask yourself, are you rationalizing or making excuses for this person's behavior? And maybe not just to yourself, but to your friends, to your family, to your support system. I've found that if you think in your head that you shouldn't tell other people about what this person did because you're afraid that they might tell you that it's unhealthy, or they might alert you to the circumstances, that's also often a sign that this might be a situation that's not healthiest for you. And then if you remember nothing else from this webinar, I want you to remember this: there will never be a scenario in which it is okay for someone to physically or sexually assault you. There is never any action or behavior that you can do that would warrant somebody assaulting you in that way. And again, it is easier said than done, and I realize everyone's circumstances are different, but as difficult as it may seem or feel, if you experience physical or sexual assault, please, please reach out to a support person that you can trust, whether that be a family member, a friend, someone at DePaul, like Liz or myself in counseling services, a professor that you trust. I promise you that there are people out there who want to assist you. If you feel like you don't have any of those individuals in your life, we are going to go over the crisis numbers. And oftentimes the domestic violence and sexual assault crisis numbers, they have ways where you can contact them, either by text, by chat. You don't necessarily have to talk to them on the phone if you're afraid of the perpetrator or person that you are experiencing these toxic or abusive qualities with. They have ways to do that confidentially so that you can maintain your safety.
That is a wonderful transition, Mallory, to our national crisis numbers. So thank you so much.
Of course.
Alrighty, so as Mallory discussed, I'm going to talk about the first two and then she'll discuss the next three. But the National Domestic Violence Hotline and Love is Respect are great resources if you or someone you know is experiencing interpersonal violence. The National Domestic Violence Hotline and Love is Respect, and I'm kind of lumping them together because Love is Respect is a subsidiary of the National Domestic Violence Hotline, but they're available 24/7, 365, so anytime you can contact them. One of the amazing features that Mallory hinted at is the ability to talk to them without having to make a phone call. You can text using Love Is to 22522, or you can log on to their websites and use their chat feature. Their websites are 100% prepared to handle interpersonal violence and understand that if you are on one of these websites, you may be in a situation where if someone walks in the room, you need to be able to exit out quickly. And they both have features where if you click one button on your keyboard, it will automatically take you to a either different website that's like changes the subject completely, so the perpetrator doesn't think you're on this website, or it will completely exit out. So both are really great options that I would encourage you to use if you need to. Love is Respect is more focused on teen dating violence and early adult dating violence. So they have a ton of resources for 14 to 17-year-olds and then early college students, which is one of the reasons I really appreciate the stuff that they have. But these hotlines are fantastic and are always going to have resources available to you.
Thank you so much, Liz. And on that note, the last three, they focus more on suicide and mental health prevention or support. So the first one is the Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and like the first two crisis numbers, they're also available 24/7, 365. You can call the phone number 1-800-273-8255. You can chat at suicidepreventionlifeline.org. And I also want to note that you can text CONNECT to 741-741. The Trevor Project is similar to the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. However, it is specific to the LGBTQA+ community. So each counselor or therapist that they have with that lifeline is trained in providing specific care to those folks who identify within that community. And finally, the Steve Fund is also a crisis prevention lifeline, but it is specific to students of color.
Alrighty. Thanks so much, Mallory. And we'll go ahead and make that note about the text for the Suicide Prevention Lifeline for the next time this presentation is used.
Awesome.
So now we're going to jump a little bit into talking about the current circumstances surrounding COVID-19 and how we can keep really healthy relationships when we're working, when we're in the same living environment, whether it's with our parents or our guardians or our friends or our significant others. And then we're going to talk about long distance relationships. So as you'll kind of notice, there is some pretty similar things in each one, because this is something that no matter what, takes a little bit of creativity to deal with. So when you are working in the same place and you're working from home, especially as students, when we're all fighting for Wi-Fi, or you're in an environment where you have 4 or 5 people at home, or even just 2 people, it can be challenging to be working, living, socializing, doing everything in the same environment. So it's important to plan in chunks and only focus on really the next 24 hours, right? So we're making it through a day at a time. We have to understand that what we're experiencing right now is a traumatic situation, whether it feels like it or not for some individuals, and our bodies are going to process that differently. So you really can't think about it in terms of planning long-term. Focus on each day and how each day is working. Maybe you're really productive one day, and the next day you're just not going to be as productive, and that is okay. When you're working at home, it's important to think about it in terms of designating zones. So if you're working at home, you want to make sure that you have a specific zone where you're doing work, and that is your specific zone that you do work. So if that means that there's only one space to do work in your living unit, then maybe that means you each have a different table in that space. Or that means that you're not doing work in your bed because we really want that to remain as your sleeping space. We also want to get creative, right? So maybe it means that when we're doing work, we're not doing work at the typical hours. Maybe it means we're doing work during other times instead. You're also going to want to create and agree on routines. So if you're in a space that has multiple people, it's really important that you're communicating with each other, which is communicating your concerns and the things that work, while we're talking about those routines and those new routines. This isn't going to be your typical working from home situation, right? We're experiencing a traumatic event, and that means that those routines are going to be different. Maybe it's understanding that I need to step away from what I'm doing right now, but when I step away, I don't want you to talk to me because I need to take that breath. It's also really important to communicate your concerns, but also communicate when things are working. This schedule is going great for me, let's keep it going. It's going to be just as positive for the other person or other people as it is for you, because communication is really what's going to help us all get through this situation. And that's the thing. We are going to get through this, but it is a hard situation. So if you are in the same living environment as your partner or your family, your guardians, same thing applies, right? Designating zones so that you can step away from everyone, right? Because you can't be around someone 24/7. You're planning in chunks. You're making sure to take time for yourself. It's important too to think about maybe a couple positives or focus on an upside. Maybe it's that you're taking 5 minutes to yourself every day, and just focus on like that 5 minutes is where I'm doing prayer or meditation or focusing, and that can really help to center you. You're getting creative once again, using those creating and agreeing new routines. Making time for each other is also really important. We kind of forget about that because if we're in the same space as someone, and this is more along friendships or romantic partners, but if you're in the same space as someone 24/7, it may not feel like you need to make time for each other, but it's really important to still schedule like an hour or schedule date nights or things like that within this space, so you're still working on healthy relationship behaviors. Same thing, you're communicating concerns and acknowledging difficulties, because this is a difficult situation. If we're not talking about the fact that it's difficult, it's going to be really hard for us to mentally process what we're experiencing. The last thing we're going to talk about is long distance relationships. When we're talking about long distance relationships right now, right, that could be anything from friendships to romantic relationships. It can really be anything, because we're living in one environment, and usually that's not with 20 friends or with our significant other. So you want to make sure that you're consistent with your scheduling when you're making time for each other, because sometimes we get into this lull where we decide, I don't want to FaceTime tonight, or I don't want to do that Netflix party tonight. And then we can kind of sink down a little bit. So it's really important to be consistent with your scheduling and making time for each other. Same thing, acknowledging difficulties and getting creative. There are a ton of different ways to get creative with this situation that we're experiencing right now. There's Chrome add-ons, so you can play trivia nights together. There's Netflix Party. There's a bunch of different ways so that you can still be socializing with people while maintaining social distancing. The important thing about this still is acknowledging the difficulties, and you'll see that in every single one, because like I said, we're in a traumatic, difficult situation, no matter what you're experiencing. And if you are not able to acknowledge that and kind of be honest with yourself about that, and you're holding yourself to the same standards of outside of this different situation, it's going to be really hard for you in the long run and in the short term to be able to process and work through this situation. So next, we're going to hop on over to resources. I'm going to talk about the first couple, and then I'm going to pass it off to Mallory. So because we're so focused on interpersonal violence and healthy and unhealthy relationships, I really wanted to provide the resource of the Indiana Coalition Against Domestic Violence. They are a wonderful coalition that has a great website. You can just type in their name into Google and it'll pop right up, that has articles about staying safe, what your path to safety or safety plan could look like, and how to stay safe with an abuser. They also have information about cybersecurity, which can be really important in interpersonal violence situations. They have great ideas for self-care and different things that you can try to be creative. And they also have additional mental health and substance abuse resources. We talked about Love is Respect and the Domestic Violence Hotline. They also have quizzes and articles as well as how-to guides and additional resources. I really love is Respect's Is My Relationship Healthy quiz, because it provides a lot of introspection. And then RAIN, which is the Rape and Abuse and Incest National Network, has a sexual assault hotline and chat that's fantastic, but they also have videos and how-to guides, news related to what's happening currently, and additional resources. On that note, we also have the DePaul Sexual Assault Survivor Advocates, which are available still 24/7 at 765-658-4650. And we have Monday through Friday from 9 to 5 a Google chat, just like any other Google chat. You just type in sas@depaul.edu. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Mallory.
Thank you so much, Liz. I really love all of those resources. Finally, like I said, I work with counseling services at DePaul, so I just wanted to make sure that everyone had our contact information, as we are still here to support all students at DePaul, although it might look a little different than before. Our phone number is 765-658-4268, and I've also listed our email address. Students can still contact our office during normal business hours, and you will get a same-day response. You can contact us for questions, consultation with counselors, referrals. So if you would like a referral for care within your community, we're able to do that. A lot of us have connections with teletherapy and telehealth and other counselors in different major cities, and as well as crisis support. So if you're in crisis, you can still contact us for help. Same as when we were on campus, if you contact that phone number after hours, so anytime outside of Monday through Friday from 8 to 5, you will still be connected with our protocol services, which is an on-call clinician, and then we will also know about it to follow up. If you visit our webpage, we are trying our best to keep that as up-to-date as possible. It has our current care model available for all of you. So if you are also looking for psychiatric referrals, we can help you with that as well. We keep an updated list of community resources as well as self-care resources. So there are several articles, websites, different webinars that are free. There are links to YouTube videos for meditation and for breathing exercises. And most recently, we are starting different virtual support spaces for students. So if you want to have additional information for that or check out descriptions, definitely head to our webpage. But I think ultimately what Liz and I would like everyone to know is that we are still here for all of you to support you, whether that is domestic violence related, sexual assault related, healthy relationship related, or just overall mental health related. We want to make sure that all of you in our DePaul community remember that you are still supported, and we're still here to help you any way we can.
Mallory, thanks so much for reaffirming that point. A couple little things to wrap up. You can email me at sa_preved@depaul.edu, and you can email Mallory at MalloryMcGee@depaul.edu. It's been great having Mallory on this webinar and providing her amazing insight. I'm so happy that we were able to record this and get it up for our students. So thank you so much, Mallory. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. You too.